讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到 Part 2嘅第12節。呢一節嘅名叫做 Of the Strange Adventure Which Befell the Valiant Don Quixote with the Bold Knight of the Mirrors。咁上一回咧就 Sancho 到最後成功阻止到 Don Quixote 單人匹馬面對住成班演員嘅還擊，抌石頭嘅還擊。Don Quixote 咧就照單全收，因為佢都認為對方咧係冇騎士嘅存在，於是乎咧佢又不屑就出手，反而係慫恿 Sancho 咧自己去面對。咁 Sancho 當然就推卻咗。繼續上路啦，我哋睇下佢哋有啲乜嘢力見。
The night succeeding the day of the encounter with death, Don Quixote and his squire passed under some tall shady trees, and Don Quixote and Sancho's persuasion ate little from the store carried by Dapple. And over their supper Sancho said to his master, "Señor, what a fool I should have looked if I have chosen for my reward the spoils of the first adventure your worship achieved, instead of the foals of the 3 mares. After all, a sparrow in the hand is better than a vulture on the wing."At the same time, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, if thou hadst let me attack them as I wanted, at the very least the emperor's gold crown and Cupid's painted wings would have fallen to thee as spoils, for I should have taken them by force and give them into thy hands. The sceptres and crowns of those play-actor emperors, said Sancho, were never yet pure gold, but only brass foil or tin. That is true, said Don Quixote.For it would not be right that the accessories of drama should be real, instead of being mere fictions and semblances, like the drama itself, towards which, Sancho, and, as a necessary consequence, towards those who represent and produce it, I would that thou wert favourably disposed, for they are all instruments of great good to the state, placing before us at every step a mirror in which we may see vividly displayed what goes on in human life.Nor is there any similitude that shows us more faithfully what we are and ought to be than the play and the players. Come, tell me, hast thou not seen a play acted in which kings, emperors, pontiffs, knights, ladies, and divers other personages were introduced? One plays the villain, another the knave, this one the merchant, that the soldier, one the sharp-witted fool, another the foolish lover. And when the play is over, and they have put off the dresses they wore in it,all the actors become equal. Yes, I've seen that, said Sancho. Well then, said Don Quixote, the same thing happens in the comedy and life of this world, where some play emperors, others popes, and, in short, all the characters that can be brought into a play. But when it is over, that is to say, when life ends, death strips them all of the garments that distinguish one from the other, and all are equal in the grave. A fine comparison, said Sancho.Though not so new but that I have heard it many and many a time, as well as that other one of the game of chess, how so long as the game lasts, each piece has its own particular office, and when the game is finished they are all mixed, jumbled up and shaken together and stowed away in the bag, which is much like ending life in the grave. Thou art growing less stultish and more shrewd every day, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Aye, said Sancho.It must be that some of your worship's shrewdness sticks to me. Land that, of itself, is barren and dry, will come to yield good fruit if you dung it and till it. What I mean is that your worship's conversation has been the dung that has fallen on the barren soil of my dry wit, and the time I have been in your service in society has been the tillage, and with the help of this I hope to yield fruit in abundance that will not fall away or slide from those paths of good breeding that your worship has made in my parched understanding.Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's affected phraseology, and perceived that what he said about his improvement was true, for now and then he spoke in a way that surprised him, though always, or mostly, when Sancho tried to talk fine and attempted polite language, he wound up by toppling over from the summit of his simplicity into the abyss of his ignorance, and where he showed his culture and his memory to the greatest advantage was in dragging in proverbs.No matter whether they had any bearing or not upon the subject in hand, as may have been seen already and will be noticed in the course of this history. In conversation of this kind they passed a good part of the night, but Sancho felt a desire to let down the curtains of his eyes, as he used to say when he wanted to go to sleep. When stripping Dapple, he left him at liberty to graze his fill. It did not remove Rocinante's saddle, as his master's express orders were, that so long as they were in the field or not sleeping under a roof, Rocinante was not to be stripped, the ancient usage established and observed by knights errant being to take off the bridle and hang it on the saddle bow, but to remove the saddle from the horse. Never. Sancho acted accordingly, and gave him the same liberty he had given Dapple, between whom and Rocinante there was a friendship so unequalled and so strong that it is handed down by tradition from father to son, that the author of this veracious history devoted some special chapters to it, which in order to preserve the propriety and decorum due to a history so heroic, he did not insert therein. Although at times he forgets this resolution of his and describes how eagerly the two beasts would scratch one another when they were together, and how, when they were tired or full, Rocinante would lay his neck across Dapple's, stretching half a yard or more on the other side, and the pair would stand thus, gazing thoughtfully on the ground, for 3 days, or at least so long as they were left alone, or hunger did not drive them to go and look for food. I may add that they say the author left it on record that he likened their friendship to that of Nisus and Euryalus, and Pylades and Orestes. And if that be so, it may be perceived, to the admiration of mankind, how firm the friendship must have been between these two peaceful animals, shaming men, who preserve friendships with one another so badly. This was why it was said, "For friend no longer is their friend, the reeds turn lances now." And someone else has sung, "Friend to friend the buck," etc. And let no one fancy that the author was at all astray when he compared the friendship of these animals to that of men. For men have received many lessons from beasts, and learned many important things, as, for example, the clyster from the stork, vomit and gratitude from the dog, watchfulness from the crane, foresight from the ant, modesty from the elephant, and loyalty from the horse. Sancho at last fell asleep at the foot of a cork tree, while Don Quixote dozed at that of a sturdy oak. But a short time only had elapsed when a noise he heard behind him awoke him, and rising up startled, he listened and looked in the direction the noise came from, and perceived 2 men on horseback, one of whom, letting himself drop from the saddle, said to the other, "Dismount, my friend, and take the bridles off the horses, for, so far as I can see, this place will furnish grass for them, and the solitude and silence my love-sick thoughts need of." As he said this, he stretched himself upon the ground, and as he flung himself down, the armor in which he was clad rattled, whereby Don Quixote perceived that he must be a knight-errant, and going over to Sancho, who was asleep, he shook him by the arm, and with no small difficulty brought him back to his senses, and said in a low voice to him, "Brother Sancho, we have got an adventure." "God send us a good one," said Sancho, "and where may her ladyship the adventure be?" "Where, Sancho?" replied Don Quixote. "Turn thine eyes and look, and thou wilt see stretched there a knight-errant who, it strikes me, is not over and above happy, for I saw him fling himself off his horse and throw himself on the ground with a certain air of dejection, and his armor rattled as he fell." "Well," said Sancho, "how does your worship make out that to be an adventure?" "I do not mean to say," returned Don Quixote, "that it is a complete adventure, but that it is the beginning of one, for it is in this way adventures begin. But listen, for it seems he is tuning a lute or guitar, and from the way he is spitting and clearing his chest he must be getting ready to sing something." "Faith, you are right," said Sancho, "and no doubt he is some enamored knight." "There is no knight-errant that is not," said Don Quixote, "but let us listen to him, for if he sings, by that thread we shall extract the ball of his thoughts, because out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." Sancho was about to reply to his master, but the Knight of the Grough's voice, which was neither very bad nor very good, stopped him, and listening attentively the pair heard him sing this sonnet: "Your pleasure, prithee, lady mine, unfold. Declare the terms that I am to obey. My will to yours submissively I mold, and from your law my feet shall never stray. Would you I die, to silent grief a prey? Then count me even now as dead and cold. Would you I tell my woes in some new way? Then shall my tale by love itself be told. The unison of opposites to prove. Of the soft wax and diamond heart am I, but still obedient to the laws of love. Here, hard or soft, I offer you my breast. Whatever you grave or stamp thereon shall rest, indelible for all eternity." With an "ah me" that seemed to be drawn from the inmost recesses of his heart, the Knight of the Grove brought his lay to an end, and shortly afterwards exclaimed in a melancholy and piteous voice, O fairest and most ungrateful woman on earth, what can it be, most serene Cide de Vandalia, that thou wilt suffer this thy captive knight to waste away and perish in ceaseless wanderings and rude and arduous toils? It is not enough that I have compelled all the knights of Navarre, all the Leonese, all the Tartessines, all the Castilians, and finally all the knights of La Mancha, to confess thee the most beautiful in the world. Not so, said Don Quixote at this, for I am of La Mancha, and I have never confessed anything of the sort, nor could I, nor should I confess a thing so much to the prejudice of my lady's beauty. Thou seest how this knight is raving, Sancho, but let us listen. Perhaps he will tell us more about himself. That he will, returned Sancho, for he seems in the mood to bewail himself for a month at a stretch. But this was not the case, for the Knight of the Grove, hearing voices near him, instead of continuing his lamentation, stood up and exclaimed in a distinct but courteous tone, Who goes there? What are you? Do you belong to the number of the happy or of the miserable? Of the miserable, answered Don Quixote. Then come to me, said he of the Grove, and rest assured that it is to woe itself and affliction itself you come. Don Quixote, finding himself answered in such a soft and courteous manner, went over to him, and so did Sancho. The noble knight took Don Quixote by the arm, saying, Sit down here, Sir Knight, for that you are one, and of those that profess knight-errantry, it is to me a sufficient proof to have found you in this place, where solitude and night, the natural couch and proper retreat of knights-errant, keep you company. To which Don made answer, A knight I am of the profession you mention, and though sorrows, misfortunes, and calamities have made my heart their abode, the compassion I feel for the misfortunes of others has not been thereby banished from it. From what you have just now sung, I gather that yours spring from love. I mean from the love you bear that fair ingrates you named in your lament. In the meantime, they had seated themselves together on the hard ground, peacefully and sociably, just as if, as soon as day broke, they were not going to break one another's heads. Are you, Sir Knight, in love perchance? Asked he of the Grove of Don Quixote. By mischance I am, replied Don Quixote, though the ills arising from well-bestowed affection should be esteemed favours rather than misfortunes. That is true, returned he of the Grove, if scorn did not unsettle our reason and understanding, for if it be excessive, it looks like revenge. I was never scorned by my lady, said Don Quixote. Certainly not, said Sancho, who stood close by, for my lady is as a lamb, and softer than a roll of butter. Is this your squire? Asked he of the Grove. He is, said Don Quixote. I never yet saw a squire, said he of the Grove, who ventured to speak when his master was speaking. At least, there is mine, who is as big as his father, and it cannot be proved that he has ever opened his lips when I am speaking. By my faith, then, said Sancho, I have spoken, and am fit to speak, in the presence of one as much, or even, but never mind. It only makes it worse to stir it. The squire of the Grove took Sancho by the arm, saying to him, Let us two go where we can talk in squire style as much as we please, and leave these gentlemen, our masters, to fight it out over the story of their loves, and depend upon it, daybreak will find them at it without having made an end of it. So be it by all means, said Sancho, and I will tell your worship who I am, that you may see whether I am to be reckoned among the number of the most talkative squires. With this, the two squires withdrew to one side, and between them there passed a conversation as droll as that which passed between their masters was serious.
好，呢一節讀到呢一度，呢一節嘅上半呢，就有一啲思辨啦，有關於演員嘅身份啊，表演者佢哋喺人前、觀眾前面佢哋演出嘅身份，同埋表演完之後，佢哋身份就變得平等啦。因為除咗佢哋嘅外套喺舞台上嘅角色放落嚟之後，佢哋就係一個普通人，係一個演員嘅身份。咁雖然佢哋喺台上面呈現出嚟嘅唔係一個演員咁簡單。同樣咧 Sancho 咧就將佢引用喺死亡啊，或者喺棋子上面、喺棋盤上面咧，都係一樣啊。因為人生前無論佢嘅地位點樣樣，死咗之後咧都係平等嘅。正如捉棋嘅時候，每一隻棋有佢自己嘅位置，有佢自己嘅功能。但係當一盤棋完結之後咧，佢哋只係會擺埋一齊個袋度，一個靜默啦，一個平等嘅狀態。就此咧，當Quixote咧就稱讚Sancho啊，你 你終於都好似海嘯喎，叻咗啲喎。之後咧，兩個人就方面喺度就休息下。而呢個時候咧，佢就聽到遠處咧有人喺度唱情歌。咁呢個唱情歌嘅人咧，都係一個騎士，而佢身邊咧亦都有一個侍從喺度。就因為呢一啲悲歌咧，就聚埋一齊，開始佢哋嘅傾談咧。騎士同騎士，侍從同侍從，兩個人各自咧，呢兩對人咧各自有大家嘅對話。下一節啦，睇下佢有啲咩有趣嘅對話。睇下呢字有啲乜嘢有趣嘅字 semblance S-E-M-B-L-A-N-C-E 名詞嚟嘅 The outward appearance or apparent form of something, especially when the reality is different 近似嘅，我哋平時成日都用另外一個字嘅 resemblance 呢個係就咁 semblance 呢個係近似 resemblance 咧係嗰個近似度再高好多，呢個係 semblance 就近似類似。similitude S-I-M-I-L-I-T-U-D-E 名詞嚟嘅 similar 啦，睇個字面就好似 similar 呢個字咧，即係好近似啊。The quality or state of being similar to something 好相仿嘅，相近。arduous A-R-D-U-O-U-S arduous 形容詞嚟嘅 involving or requiring strenuous effort, difficult and tiring 好艱巨嘅艱辛，一個負面啲嘅字咧，好艱辛嘅狀態咧咁樣。好，我哋下一次再同大家讀你聽，拜拜。大家好，讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到 Part 2嘅第13節。呢一節個名叫做 In which is continued the adventure of the Knight of the Grove。Together with the sensible, original, and tranquil colloquy that passed between the two squires， 路上咧，當 Quixote 同 Sancho 咧遇到另一對騎士同僕人嘅兩人，個身份咧同佢哋一模一樣，亦都係上路喺度歷險緊。咁佢哋自不然咧就好想有一個交流啦。於是乎咧，騎士同騎士，侍從咧同侍從咧，大家各自就分開坐低喺度交心交談，分享嘅經歷。呢一節咧就睇下佢哋對話嘅內容到底係講乜嘢。
The knights and the squires made two parties, these telling the story of their lives, the others the story of their loves. But the history relates, first of all, the conversation of the servants, and afterwards takes up that of the masters. And it says that, withdrawing a little from the others, he of the grove said to Sancho,A hard life it is we lead and live, Senor. We that are squires to knights errant, verily, we eat our bread in the sweat of our faces, which is one of the curses God laid on our first parents. It may be said too, added Sancho, that we eat it in the chill of our bodies. For who gets more heat and cold than the miserable squires of knight-errantry? Even so, it would not be so bad if we had something to eat, for woes are lighter if there's bread.But sometimes we got a day or two without breaking our fast, except with the wind that blows. All that, said he of the grove, may be endured and put up with when we have hopes of reward. For, unless the knight-errant he serves is excessively unlucky, after a few turns the squire will at least find himself rewarded with a fine government of some island or some fair county. I, said Sancho, have already told my master that I shall be content with the government of some island,and he is so noble and generous that he has promised it to me ever so many times. I, said he of the grove, shall be satisfied with a canonry for my services, and my master has already assigned me one. Your master, said Sancho, no doubt is a knight in the church line, and can bestow rewards of that sort on his good squire, but mine is only a layman, though I remember some clever, but to my mind designing people, strove to persuade him to try and become an archbishop.He, however, would not be anything but an emperor, but I was trembling all the time lest he should take a fancy to go into the church, not finding himself fit to hold office in it. For I may tell you, though I seem a man, I am no better than a beast for the church. Well then, you are wrong there, said he of the grove, for those island governments are not all satisfactory. Some are awkward, some are poor, some are dull, and, in short,The highest and choicest brings with it a heavy burden of cares and troubles which the unhappy wight to whose lot it has fallen bears upon his shoulders. Far better would it be for us who have adopted this accursed service to go back to our own houses, and then employ ourselves in pleasanter occupations, in hunting or fishing, for instance. For what squire in the world is there so poor as not to have a hack and a couple of greyhounds and a fishing rod to amuse himself with in his own village? I am not in want of any of those things, said Sancho. To be sure, I have no hack, but I have an ass that is worth my master's horse twice over. God send me a bad Easter, and that the next one I am to see. If I would swap, even if I got 4 bushels of barley to boot, you will laugh at the value I put on my dapple, for dapple is the colour of my beast. As to greyhounds, I can't want for them, for there are enough and to spare in my town. And moreover, there is more pleasant in sport when it is at other people's expense. In truth and earnest, Sir Squire, said he of the Grove, I have made up my mind and determined to have done with these drunken vagaries of these nights, and go back to my village, and bring up my children, for I have 3, like 3 oriental pearls. I have 2, said Sancho, that might be presented before the Pope himself, especially a girl whom I am breeding up for a countess, please God, though in spite of her mother. And how old is this lady that is being bred up for a countess? Asked he of the Grove. 15, a couple of years more or less, answered Sancho, but she is as tall as a lance, and as fresh as an April morning, and as strong as a porter. Those are gifts to fit her to be not only a countess, but a nymph of the greenwood, said he of the Grove. Whoreson strumpet, what piff the rogue must have. To which Sancho made answer somewhat sulkily, he's no strumpet, nor was her mother, nor will either of them be, please God, while I live. Speak more civilly, for one bred up among knights errant, who are courtesy itself, your words don't seem to me to be very becoming. Oh, how little you know about compliments, Sir Squire, returned he of the Grove. What? Don't you know that when a horseman delivers a good lance thrust at the bull in the plaza, or when anyone does anything very well, people are wont to say, ha, whoreson rip, how well he has done it, and that what seems to be abused in the expression is high praise. Disown sons and daughters, Signor, who don't do what deserves that compliments of this sort should be paid to their parents. I do disown them, replied Sancho, and in this way, and by the same reasoning, you might call me and my children and my wife all the strumpets in the world, for all they do and say is of a kind that in the highest degree deserves the same praise. And to see them again, I pray God to deliver me from mortal sin, or, what comes to the same thing, to deliver me from this perilous calling of squire, into which I have fallen a second time, decayed, and beguiled by a purse with 100 ducats that I found one day in the heart of the Sierra Morena. And the devil is always putting a bag full of doubloons before my eyes here, there, everywhere, until I fancy at every stop I am putting my hand on it, and hugging it, and carrying it home with me, and making investments and getting interest, and living like a prince. And so long as I think of this, I make light of all the hardships I endure with this simpleton of a master of mine, who, I well know, is more of a madman than a knight. That's why they say that covetousness bursts the bag, said he of the Grove. But if you come to talk of that sort, there is not a greater one in the world than my master, for he is one of those of whom they say, the cares of others kill the ass. For in order that another knight may recover the senses he has lost, he makes a madman of himself, and goes looking for what, when found, may, for all I know, fly in his own face. And is he in love perchance? Asked Sancho. He is, said of the Grove, with one Casadilla de Vandalia, the rawest and best roasted lady the whole world could produce. But that rawness is not the only foot he limps on, for he has greater schemes rumbling in his bowels, as will be seen before many hours are over. There's no road so smooth but it has some hole and hindrance in it, said Sancho. In other houses they cook beans, but in mine it's by the potful. Madness will have more followers and hangers-on than sound sense. But if there be any truth in the common saying, that to have companions in trouble gives some relief, I may take consolation from you, inasmuch as you serve a master as crazy as my own. Crazy but valiant, replied he of the Grove, and more roguish than crazy or valiant. Mine is not that, said Sancho. I mean, he has nothing of the rogue in him. On the contrary, he has the soul of a pitcher. He has no thought of doing harm to anyone, only good to all, nor has he any malice whatever in him. A child might persuade him that it is night at noonday, and for his simplicity I love him as the core of my heart, and I can't bring myself to leave him. Let him do ever such foolish things. For all that, brother and signor, said he of the Grove, if the blind lead the blind, both are in danger of falling into the pit. It is better for us to beat a quiet retreat and get back to our own quarters. For those who seek adventures don't always find good ones. Sancho kept spitting from time to time, and his spittle seemed somewhat ropey and dry, observing which the compassionate squire of the grove said, "It seems to me that with all this talk of ours, our tongues are sticking to the roofs of our mouths. But I have a pretty good loosener hanging from the saddle bow of our horse." And getting up, he came back the next minute with a large bottle of wine and a pasty half a yard across. And this is no exaggeration, for it was made of a house rabbit so big that Sancho, as he handled it, took it to be made of a goat, not to say a kid, and looking at it, he said, "And do you carry this with you, senor?" "Why, what are you thinking about?" said the other. "Do you take me for some paltry squire? I carry a better larder on my horse's croup than a general takes with him when he goes on the march." Sancho ate without requiring to be pressed, and in the dark bolted mouthfuls like the knots on a tether, and said he, "You are a proper trusty squire, one of the right sort, sumptuous and grand, as this banquet shows, which, if it has not come here by magic art, at any rate has the look of it, not like me, a lucky beggar, that have nothing more in my alforjas than a scrap of cheese, so hard that one might brain a giant in it, and, to keep it company, a few dozen carrots, and as many more filberts and walnuts, thanks to the austerity of my master, and the idea he has and the rule he follows, that knights errant must not live or sustain themselves on anything except dried fruits and the herbs of the field. By my faith, brother, said he of the grove, my stomach is not made for thistles, or wild pears, or roots of the woods. Let our masters do as they like, with their chivalry notions and laws, and eat what those enjoin. I carry my prop basket, and the spots are hanging to the saddle bow, whatever they may say, and it is such an object of worship with me, and I love it so, that there is hardly a moment but I am kissing and embracing it over and over again." And so saying, he thrust it into Sancho's hands, who, raising it aloft, pointed to his mouth, gazed at the stars for a quarter of an hour, and when he had done drinking, let his head fall on one side, and giving a deep sigh, exclaimed, "Ah, whoreson rogue, how Catholic it is!" "There you see," said he of the grove, hearing Sancho's exclamation, "how you have called this wine whoreson by way of praise." "Well," said Sancho, "I own it, and I grant it is no dishonor to call anyone whoreson when it is to be understood as praise. But tell me, senor, by what you love best? Is it still that real wine?" "Oh, rare wine taster," said he of the grove. "Nowhere else, indeed, does it come from, and it has some years' age too." "Leave me alone for that," said Sancho. "Never fear, but I'll hit upon the place it came from somehow. What would you say, Sir Squire, to my having such a great natural instinct in judging wines that you have only to let me smell one, and I can tell positively its country, its kind, its flavor and soundness, the changes it will undergo, and everything that appertains to a wine? But it is no wonder, for I have had in my family, on my father's side, the two best wine tasters that have been known in La Mancha for many a long year, and to prove it, I'll tell you now a thing that happened them. They gave the two of them some wine out of a cask to try, asking their opinion as to the condition, quality, goodness, or badness of the wine. One of them tried it with the tip of his tongue, the other did no more than bring it to his nose. The first said the wine had a flavor of iron. The second said it had a strong flavor of cordovan. The owner said the cask was clean, and that nothing had been added to the wine from which it could have got a flavor of either iron or leather. Nevertheless, these two great wine tasters held to what they had said. Time went by, the wine was sold, and when they came to clean out the cask, they found in it a small key hanging to a thong of cordovan. See now if one who comes of the same stock has not a right to give his opinion in such like cases. Therefore, I say, said he of the grove, let us give up going in quest of adventures, and as we have loaves, let us not go looking for capes, but return to our cribs, for God will find us there if it be his will. Until my master reaches Saragossa, said Sancho, I will remain in his service. After that, we'll see. The end of it was that the two squires talked so much and drank so much that sleep had to tie their tongues and moderate their thirst, for to quench it was impossible. And so the pair fell asleep, clinging to the now nearly empty bottle and with half-chewed morsels in their mouths. And there we will leave them for the present, to relate what passed between the knight of the grove and him of the rueful countenance.
好，呢一節讀到嚟呢一度，放咗個焦點喺兩位侍從身上啊 ，Sancho 同埋另一位 Squire of the Grove， 佢哋嘅對話好多都係批評、吐槽啦，即係話自己嘅主人啊做事好誇張啊，係咪有陣時傻咗啊、莽撞啊之類啊？咁都話自己佢哋嘅生活咧，就因為佢哋嘅莽撞不切實際咧，而搞到好老到、辛苦、好艱辛。各自有對自己主人嘅評價啦。咁 Sancho 咧就對於 Don Quixote 評價就係、雖然佢係即係心地善良啊，但係咧佢真係傻嘅，佢真係瘋癲嘅，係個 madman 嚟嘅。咁到最後咧，佢哋都會講啊，如果我哋唔做呢啲嘢，既然我哋都有啲錢，都有一啲財產，不如就唔好做啦，翻去做翻我哋本業啦。我哋自己咪做得幾好本身，我哋又有仔女，人哋有3個仔女 ，Sancho 有2個。咁 Sancho 咧就透露到原來佢自己本身係一個 wine taster， 佢識品酒嘅，亦都品嘗得非常之準確。呢個亦都係來自佢家族嘅一個基因嚟嘅，代代相傳。咁但係咧，去到佢呢代咧就冇啦。佢就有諗過啊，不如翻返去做一個 wine taster， 會有個咁嘅伏線喺度咧。好，我哋睇啲字有咩字同大家分享。Canonry C-A-N-O-N-R-Y 名詞嚟嘅 ，the office or benefice of a canon。咁呢個 canon 嘅意思咧係教會、教堂入面要職係一個職員。Squire of the Grove 佢所講嘅就係佢嘅騎士咧就應承咗佢，如果佢哋有所成就啦，佢就會俾一個 canonry 俾佢，就係俾一個工作俾佢喺個教會入面嘅一個教會嘅要職。咁通常教會要職咧都好多錢。Vagary V-A-G-A-R-Y vagary 名詞嚟嘅。An unexpected and inexplicable change in a situation or in someone's behavior， 變幻無常嘅不可捉摸嘅性情啊，多變嘅性情 vagary。咁啊，當然係形容嗰個騎士啦，兩位騎士都係好 vagary 啊。Cordovan C-O-R-D-O-V-A-N 呢啲好少用啊，名詞嚟嘅。A kind of soft leather made originally from goat skin and now from horsehide， 山羊皮。文中最尾有提到啦，嗰個 wine taster 其中這個品酒師聞到酒入面有 cordovan 嘅味，聞到有山羊皮嘅味。本來咧酒嘅持有人咧就話我根本就冇泡浸到任何嘢喺個酒入面，但係後嚟咧佢哋打開個酒瓶入面咧，真係發現到山羊皮喺入面。OK， 我哋呢一節分享到呢度，下一次再同大家讀你聽，拜拜。讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到 Part 2嘅第14節，呢一節嘅名叫做 Wherein is continued the adventure of the Knight of the Grove。 咁上一回咧就講 Sancho 同森林嘅侍從啦，咁兩個侍從咧就喺度講起大家各自嘅主人，佢哋對於遊俠精神嘅睇法啦，佢哋受嘅苦楚啦，得到嘅承諾啦，一個咧就係會做教會嘅要職啦，咁 Sancho 咧就係想做島主嘅，咁但係究竟做唔做到咧？佢哋都係一往無前，呢一刻都係相信佢哋嘅主人。最後咧亦都有講過啊，如果唔係做侍從，唔發呢啲白日夢，我可以做啲乜？ Sancho 家族背景咧係品酒師嚟嘅，呢個侍從嘅對話咧就結束咗啦。咁我哋睇下佢哋嘅主人們、遊客們，佢哋嘅對話又係點
？Among the things that passed between Don Quixote and the Knight of the Wood, the history tells us he of the Grove said to Don Quixote, "In fine, Sir Knight, I would have you know that my destiny, or more properly speaking, my choice led me to fall in love with the peerless Cide de Vandalia. I call her peerless because she has no peer, whether it be in bodily stature or in the supremacy of rank and beauty. This same Cide, then, that I speak of, requited my honourable passion and gentle aspirations by compelling me, as his stepmother did Hercules, to engage in many perils of various sorts, at the end of each promising me that, with the end of the next, the object of my hopes should be attained, but my labors have gone on increasing link by link until they are past counting. Nor do I know what will be the last one that is to be the beginning of the accomplishment of my chaste desires. On one occasion she bade me go and challenge the famous giantess of Seville, La Giralda by name, who is as mighty and strong as if made of brass, and though never stirring from one spot, is the most restless and changeable woman in the world. I came, I saw, I conquered, and I made her stay quiet and behave herself, for nothing but north winds blew for more than a week. Another time I was ordered to lift those ancient stones, the mighty bulls of Guisando, an enterprise that might more fitly be entrusted to porters than to knights. Again she bade me fling myself into the cavern of Cabra, an unparalleled and awful peril, and bring her a minute account of all that is concealed in those gloomy depths. I stopped the motion of the Giralda, I lifted the bulls of Guisando, I flung myself into the cavern, and brought to light the secrets of his abyss, and my hopes are as dead can be, and her scorn and her commands as lively as ever. To be brief, last of all she has commanded me to go through all the provinces of Spain, and compel all the knights errant wandering therein to confess that she surpasses all women alive today in beauty, and that I am the most valiant and the most deeply enamored knight on earth, in support of which claim I have already travelled over the greater part of Spain, and have there vanquished several knights who have dared to contradict me. But what I most plume and pride myself upon is having vanquished in single combat that so famous knight Don Quixote of La Mancha, and made him confess that my Casildea is more beautiful than his Dulcinea. And in this one victory I hold myself to have conquered all the knights in the world. For this Don Quixote that I speak of has vanquished them all, and I having vanquished him, his glory, his fame, and his honour have passed and are transferred to my person. For the more the vanquished have of fair renown, the greater the glory gilds the victor's crown. Thus the innumerable achievements of the said Don Quixote are now set down to my account and have become mine. Don Quixote was amazed when he heard the Knight of the Grove, and was 1,000 times on the point of telling him he lied, and had the lie direct already on the tip of his tongue, but he restrained himself as well as he could, in order to force him to confess the lie with his own lips. So he said to him quietly, "As to what you say, Sir Knight, about having vanquished most of the knights of Spain, or even of the whole world, I say nothing, but that you have vanquished Don Quixote of La Mancha I consider doubtful. It may have been some other that resembled him, although there are few like him." "How, not vanquished?" said he of the Grove. "By the heaven that is above us, I fought Don Quixote and overcame him and made him yield. And he is a man of tall stature, gaunt features, long, lank limbs, with hair turning grey, an aquiline nose rather hooked, and large black drooping moustaches. He does battle under the name of the Countenance, and he has for squire a peasant called Sancho Panza. He presses the loins and rules the reins of the famous steed called Rocinante, and lastly, he has for the mistress of his will a certain Dulcinea El Toboso, once upon a time called Adonza Lorenzo, just as I call mine Casildea de Vandalia, because her name is Casida, and she is of Andalusia. If all these tokens are not enough to vindicate the truth of what I say, here is my sword, that will compel incredulity itself to give credence to it." "Calm yourself, Sir Knight," said Don Quixote, "and give ear to what I am about to say to you. I would have you know that this Don Quixote you speak of is the greatest friend I have in the world, so much so that I may say I regard him in the same light as my own person. And from the precise and clear indications you have given, I cannot but think that he must be the very one you have vanquished. On the other hand, I see with my eyes and feel with my hands that it is impossible it can have been the same, unless indeed it be that, as he has many enemies who are enchanters, and one in particular who is always persecuting him, some one of these may have taken his shape in order to allow himself to be vanquished, so as to defraud him of the fame that his exalted achievements as a knight have earned and acquired for him throughout the known world. And in confirmation of this, I must tell you too, that it is but 10 hours since these said enchanters, his enemies, transformed the shape and person of the fair Dulcinea El Toboso into a foul and mean village lass, and in the same way they must have transformed Don Quixote. And if all this does not suffice to convince you of the truth of what I say, here is Don Quixote himself, who will maintain it by arms, on foot or on horseback, or in any way you please. And so saying, he stood up and laid his hand on his sword, waiting to see what the knight of the grove would do, who in an equally calm voice said in reply, "Pledges don't distress a good player. He who has succeeded in vanquishing you once when transformed, Sir Don Quixote, may fairly hope to subdue you in your own proper shape. But as it is not becoming for knights to perform their feats of arms in the dark, like highwaymen and bullies, let us wait till daylight, that the sun may behold our deeds, and the conditions of our combat shall be that the vanquished shall be at the victor's disposal, to all that he may enjoin, provided the injunction be such as shall be becoming a knight." "I am more than satisfied with these conditions and terms," replied Don Quixote, and so saying, they betook themselves to where their squires lay, and found them snoring, and in the same posture they were in when sleep fell upon them. They roused them up, and bade them get the horses ready, as at sunrise they were to engage in a bloody and arduous single combat, at which intelligence Sancho was aghast and thunderstruck, trembling for the safety of his master because of the mighty deeds he had heard the squire of the grove ascribe to his. But without a word the two squires went in quest of their cattle, for by this time the 3 horses and the ass had smelt one another out, and were all together. On the way he of the grove said to Sancho, "You must know, brother, that it is the custom with the fighting men of Andalusia, when they are godfathers in any quarrel, not to stand idle with folded arms while their godsons fight. I say so to remind you that while our masters are fighting, we too have to fight, and knock one another to shivers." "That custom, Sir Squire," replied Sancho, "may hold good among those bullies and fighting men you talk of, but certainly not among the squires of knights errant. At least, I have never heard of my master speak of any custom of the sort, and he knows all the laws of knight-errantry by heart. But granting it true that there is an express law that squires are to fight while their masters are fighting, I don't mean to obey it, but to pay the penalty that may be laid on peacefully minded squires like myself, for I am sure it cannot be more than 2 pounds of wax, and I would rather pay that, for I know it will cost me less than the lint I shall be at the expense of to mend my head, which I look upon as broken and split already. There's another thing that makes it impossible for me to fight, that I have no sword, for I never carried one in my life." "I know a good remedy for that," said he of the grove. "I have here 2 linen bags of the same size. You shall take one, and I the other, and we will fight at back blows with equal arms." "If that's the way, so be it with all my heart," said Sancho, "for that sort of battle will serve to knock the dust out of us instead of hurting us." "That will not do," said the other, "for we must put into the bags, to keep the wind from blowing them away, 6 nice smooth pebbles, all of the same weight, and in this way we shall be able to base one another without doing ourselves any harm or mischief." "Body of my father," said Sancho, "see what marten and sable and pads of carded cotton he is putting into the bags, that our heads may not be broken and our bones beaten to jelly. But even if they are filled with tossed silk, I can tell you, senor, I am not going to fight. Let our masters fight. That's their lookout, and let us drink and live. For time will take care to ease us of our lives, without our going to look for Philips, so that they may be finished off before their proper time comes and they drop from ripeness." "Still," returned he of the grove, "we must fight, if it be only for half an hour." "By no means," said Sancho. "I'm not going to be so discourteous or so ungrateful as to have any quarrel, be it ever so small, with one I have eaten and drunk with. Besides, who the devil could bring himself to fight in cold blood without anger or provocation?" "I can remedy that entirely," said he of the grove, "and in this way, before we begin the battle, I will come up to your worship fair and softly, and give you 3 or 4 buffets, with which I shall stretch you at my feet and rouse your anger, though it were sleeping sounder than a dormouse." "To match that plan," said Sancho, "I have another that is not a whit behind it. I will take a cudgel, and before your worship comes near enough to waken my anger, I will send yours so sound to sleep with wax that it won't waken unless it be in the other world, where it is known that I am not a man to let my face be handled by anyone. Let each look out for the arrow, though the surer way would be to let everyone's anger sleep, for nobody knows the heart of anyone, and a man may come for wool and go back shorn. God gave his blessing to peace and his curse to quarrels. If a hunted cat, surrounded and hard-pressed, turns into a lion, God knows what I, who am a man, may turn into. And so from this time forth I warn you, Sir Squire, that all the harm and mischief that may come of our quarrel will be put down to your account. Very good, said he of the grove. God will send the dawn and we shall be all bright. And now gay-plumaged birds of all sorts began to warble in the trees, and with their varied and gladsome notes seemed to welcome and salute the fresh morn that was beginning to show the beauty of her countenance at the gates and balconies of the east, shaking from her locks a profusion of liquid pearls, in which dulcet moisture bathed. The plants, too, seemed to shed and shower down a pearly spray. The willows distilled sweet manna, the fountains laughed, the brooks babbled, the woods rejoiced, and the meadows arrayed themselves in all their glory at her coming. But hardly had the light of day made it possible to see and distinguish things, when the first object that presented itself to the eyes of Sancho Panza was the squire of the grove's nose, which was so big that it almost overshadowed his whole body. It is in fact stated that it was of enormous size, hooked in the middle, covered with warts, and of a mulberry colour like an eggplant. It hung down 2 fingers' length below his mouth, and the size, the colour, the warts, and the bend of it made his face so hideous that Sancho, as he looked at him, began to trample hand and foot like a child in convulsions, and he vowed in his heart to let himself be given 200 buffets, sooner than be provoked to fight that monster. Don Quixote examined his adversary, and found that he already had his helmet on and visor lowered, so that he could not see his face. He observed, however, that he was a sturdily built man, but not very tall in stature. Over his armour he wore a surcoat and cassock of what seemed to be the finest cloth of gold, all bespangled with glittering mirrors like little moons, which gave him an extremely gallant and splendid appearance. Above his helmet fluttered a great quantity of plumes, green, yellow, and white, and his lance, which was leaning against a tree, was very long and stout, and had a steel point more than a palm in length. Don Quixote observed all, and took note of all, and from what he saw and observed he concluded that the said knight must be a man of great strength. But he did not for all that give way to fear. Like Sancho Panza, on the contrary, with a composed and dauntless air, he said to the Knight of the Mirrors, "If, Sir Knight, your great eagerness to fight has not banished your courtesy, by it I would entreat you to raise your visor a little, in order that I may see if the comeliness of your countenance corresponds with that of your equipment. Whether you come victorious or vanquished out of this emprise, Sir Knight," replied he of the Mirrors, "you have more than enough time and leisure to see me, and if now I do not comply with your request, it is because it seems to me I should do a serious wrong to the fair Casildea de Vandalia in wasting time while I stop to raise my visor before compelling you to confess what you are already aware I maintain." "Well then," said Don Quixote, "while we are mounting, you can at least tell me if I am that Don Quixote whom you said you vanquished." "To that we answer you," said he of the Mirrors, "that you are as like the very knight I vanquished as one egg is like another. But as you say enchanters persecute you, I will not venture to say positively whether you are the said person or not." "That," said Don Quixote, "is enough to convince me that you are under a deception. However, entirely to relieve you of it, let our horses be brought, and in less time than it would take you to raise your visor, if God, my lady, and my arms stand me in good stead, I shall see your face, and you shall see that I am not the vanquished Don Quixote you take me to be." With this, cutting short the colloquy, they mounted, and Don Quixote wheeled Rocinante round in order to take a proper distance to charge back upon his adversary, and he of the Mirrors did the same. But Don Quixote had not moved away 20 paces when he heard himself called by the other, and, each returning halfway, he of the Mirrors said to him, "Remember, Sir Knight, that the terms of our combat are, that the vanquished, as I said before, shall be at the victor's disposal." "I am aware of it already," said Don Quixote, "provided what is commanded and imposed upon the vanquished be things that do not transgress the limits of chivalry." "That is understood," replied he of the Mirrors. At this moment the extraordinary nose of the squire presented itself to Don Quixote's view, and he was no less amazed than Sancho at the sight, insomuch that he set him down as a monster of some kind, or a human being of some new species or unearthly breed. Sancho, seeing his master retiring to run his course, did not like to be left alone with a nosy man, fearing that with one flap of that nose on his own the battle would be all over for him, and he would be left stretched on the ground. either by the blow or with fright. So he ran after his master, holding on to Rocinante's stirrup leather, and when it seemed to him time to turn about, he said, I implore of your worship, Signor, before you turn to charge, to help me up into this cork tree, from which I will be able to witness the gallant encounter your worship is going to have with this knight, more to my taste and better than from the ground. It seems to me rather, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that thou wouldst mount a scaffold in order to see the bulls without danger. To tell the truth, returned Sancho, the monstrous nose of that squire has filled me with fear and terror, and I dare not stay near him. It is, said Don Quixote, such a one that, were I not what I am, it would terrify me too. So come, I will help thee up where thou wilt. While Don Quixote waited for Sancho to mount into the cork tree, he of the mirrors took as much ground as he considered requisite, and supposing Don Quixote to have done the same, without waiting for any sound of trumpet or other signal to direct them, he wheeled his horse, which was not more agile or better looking than Rocinante, and at his top speed, which was an easy trot, he proceeded to charge his enemy. Seeing him, however, engaged in putting Sancho up, he drew rein, and halted in mid-career, for which his horse was very grateful, as he was already unable to go. Don Quixote, fancying that his foe was coming down upon him flying, drove his spurs vigorously into Rocinante's lean flanks and made him scud along in such style that the history tells us that on this occasion only was he known to make something like running, for on all others it was a simple trot with him. And with this unparalleled fury, he bore down where he of the mirrors stood digging his spurs into his horse up to buttons, without being able to make him stir a finger's length from the spot where he had come to a standstill in his course. At this lucky moment and crisis, Don Quixote came upon his adversary, in trouble with his horse and embarrassed with his lands, which he either could not manage or had no time to lay in rest. Don Quixote, however, paid no attention to these difficulties, and in perfect safety to himself and without any risk encountered him of the mirrors with such force that he brought him to the ground in spite of himself over the haunches of his horse, and with so heavy a fall that he lay to all appearance dead, not stirring hand or foot. The instant Sancho saw him fall, he slid down from the cork tree and made all haste to where his master was, who, dismounting from Rocinante, went and stood over him of the mirrors, and unlacing his helmet to see if he was dead, and to give him air if he should happen to be alive, he saw, who can say what he saw, without filling all who hear it with astonishment, wonder, and awe. He saw, the history says, the very countenance, the very face, the very look, the very physiognomy, the very effigy, the very image of the bachelor Samson Carrasco. As soon as he saw it, he called out in a loud voice, Make haste here, Sancho, and behold what thou art to see but not to believe. Quick, son, and learn what magic can do, and wizards and enchanters are capable of. Sancho came up, and when he saw the countenance of the bachelor Carrasco, he fell to crossing himself 1,000 times, and blessing himself as many more. All this time the prostrate knight showed no signs of life, and Sancho said to Don Quixote, It is my opinion, Signor, that in any case your worship should take and thrust your sword into the mouth of this one here, that looks like the bachelor Samson Carrasco. Perhaps in him you will kill one of your enemies, the enchanters. Thy advice is not bad, said Don Quixote, for of enemies the fewer the better, and he was drawing his sword to carry into effect Sancho's counsel and suggestion, when the squire of the mirrors came up, now without the nose which had made him so hideous, and cried out in a loud voice, Mind what you are about, Signor Don Quixote. That is your friend, the bachelor Samson Carrasco, you have at your feet, and I am his squire. And the nose, said Sancho, seeing him without the hideous feature he had before, to which he replied, I have it here in my pocket, and putting his hand into his right pocket, he pulled out a masquerade nose of varnished pasteboard of the make already described, and Sancho, examining him more and more closely, exclaimed aloud in a voice of amazement, Holy Mary be good to me! Isn't it Tom Cecile, my neighbor and gossip? Why, to be sure I am, returned the now unknown squire. Tom Cecile I am, gossip and friend Sancho Panza, and I'll tell you presently the means and tricks and falsehoods by which I have been brought here. But in the meantime, beg and entreat of your master not to touch, maltreat, wound, or slay the knight of the mirrors whom he has at his feet, because, beyond all dispute, it is the rash and ill-advised bachelor Samson Carrasco, our fellow townsman. At this moment he of the mirrors came to himself, and Don Quixote, perceiving it, held the naked point of his sword over his face, and said to him, "You are a dead man, knight, unless you confess that the peerless Dulcinea El Toboso excels your Casilia de Vandalia in beauty. And in addition to this, you must promise, if you should survive this encounter and fall, to go to the city of El Toboso and present yourself before her on my behalf, that she deal with you according to her good pleasure. And if she leaves you free to do yours, you are in like manner to return and seek me out, and tell me what may have passed between you and her, conditions which, in accordance with what we stipulated before our combat, do not transgress the just limits of knight-errantry." "I confess," said the fallen knight, "that the dirty tattered shoe of the lady Dulcinea El Toboso is better than the ill-combed though clean beard of Casilia. And I promise to go and to return from her presence to yours, and to give you a full and particular account of all you demand of me. You must also confess and believe," added Don Quixote, "that the knight you vanquished was not and could not be Don Quixote of La Mancha, but someone else in his likeness, just as I confess and believe that you, though you seem to be the bachelor Samson Carrasco, are not so, but some other resembling him, whom my enemies have here put before me in his shape, in order that I may restrain and moderate the vehemence of my wrath, and make a gentle use of the glory of my victory. I confess, hold, and think everything to be as you believe, hold, and think it." The crippled knight. "Let me rise, I entreat you, if indeed the shock of my fall will allow me, for it has left me in a sorry plight enough." Don Quixote helped him to rise, with the assistance of his squire Tom Cecile, from whom Sancho never took his eyes, and to whom he put questions, the replies to which furnished clear proof that he was really and truly the Tom Cecile he said, but the impression made on Sancho's mind by what his master said about the enchanters having changed the face of the Knight of Mirrors into that of the bachelor Samson Carrasco would not permit him to believe what he saw with his eyes. In fine, both master and man remained under the delusion, and down in the mouth, and out of luck, he of the mirrors and his squire parted from Don Quixote and Sancho, he meaning to go look for some village where he could plaster and strap his ribs. Don Quixote and Sancho resumed their journey to Saragossa, and on it the history leaves them in order that it may tell who the Knight of the Mirrors and his long-nosed squire were.
好，呢一節咧都幾峰迴路轉喎。第一咧就有一個打鬥場面啦，第二就係有個 review 喎，有個 plot 喺度喎。我哋講個打鬥先啦嚇，咁打鬥咧就都係其實好多對話去穿插，真正嗰個 action 咧，只不過係對方衝緊過嚟，騎住一匹比 Rocinante 更加好嘅駿馬，但因為咧 Don Quixote 喺嗰一刻咧就扶緊阿 Sancho 上棵樹度去觀戰。咁咧，對方咧，於是乎咧就收掣，都有啲遊俠精神，有啲道義嘅，收掣收慢咗。咁而當 Quixote 回頭一見到對方衝緊過嚟咧，佢就唔知道對方收慢，於是乎咧佢就衝刺就疾衝，然後好快速嘅方法咧就擊倒咗對方，打暈咗對方呢個騎士。但因為咧佢睇唔到對方嘅騎士嘅容貌嘅，於是乎呢一刻咧佢就除咗對方嘅頭盔啦，赫然發覺咧呢一個騎士原來係識得嘅。呢個騎士咧就係 Samson Carrasco， 而呢個 Samson Carrasco 咧之前自稱咧係森林嘅騎士啦，更加誇下海口咧話佢已經係擊斃咗 Don Quixote， 將佢打低咗，冇話打死嘅，打低咗。要 Don Quixote 承認佢嘅情人 Dulcinea El Toboso 係比佢自己嘅情人為之低級嘅，佢咧就係至高無上嘅騎士啦。亦都係因為呢啲咁嘅言論咧，就令到 Don Quixote要同佢單打獨鬥，兩個侍從當然喺度爭論究竟要唔要打起上嚟啦，因為就唔想打啦 ，Sancho 好唔想打，但係結果咧都係決定觀戰或者出手嘅時候 ，Sancho 咧亦都發覺對面嘅呢個侍從原來嘅身份就係佢個鄰居，咁佢個鄰居就叫做 Tom Cecile。呢個假扮嘅身份咧就係帶住一個好奇怪嘅鼻，一個好大嘅鼻，咁點解咧就係唔想俾人認出咯。於是乎呢個打鬥嘅事件呢，就真相大白啦，對方嘅身份呢係無從嘅。點解要無從呢？尤其是 Samson Carrasco 前幾節先至以學者嘅身份出現，話俾 Don Quixote 聽佢嘅事蹟，亦都知道咗多咗好多佢哋嘅事。但係咧，佢竟然只係想利用呢啲咁嘅資訊呢去抬高自己。咁但係呢一刻咧，都唔知道 Samson 點解要冒充做呢個森林騎士嘅真正原因，因為佢呢刻咧係俾人打暈咗。 估唔到唔係一場單純打鬥，唔係一個遊俠之間嘅一個對決，而係一個身份上面嘅錯誤。我哋睇下呢字有啲咩字同大家分享。常用啲嘅字啊 bade B-A-D-E bade bid 嘅 past tense 動詞嚟嘅，意思係 utter a greeting of farewell to command or order someone to do something。我哋中文會叫做致意啊，或者係示意啦，成日用嘅呢個字常用嘅。文中亦都成日出現呢個字，一個副詞嚟嘅 therein T-H-E-R-E-I-N there 加個 in 呢個字 therein in that place document or respect， 叫字面都解釋到啦，就係其中啦、當中啦。每一節嘅題目經常會出現 wherein therein 呢啲字。 masquerade M-A-S-Q-U-E-R-A-D-E masquerade 名詞嚟嘅 a false show or pretense 偽裝 masquerade。 文中有提到對方呢個 Tom Cecil 戴住一個好大嘅鼻，一個假鼻，一個 masquerade 一個偽裝。好，我哋呢一節讀到呢度，下一次仲大家讀嚟聽，拜拜。